Hello and welcome to Auto Shenanigans. How the devil are you? Have you had a good week? My name is John. Thank you very much for joining me for another exciting Great British Road Journey. It's time for a new county, and this week I thought we'd venture into Surrey, a county that is apparently 24% woodland, making it the most wooded county in the country, and it also features some of the highest average house prices. I'm not really sure I'm going to fit in, but it sounds rather lovely. So where are we off to today? Good question, John. Today we'll be taking a journey across Surrey from Weybridge to Farnham. As always, to help navigate our way around, we'll be using my 1923 Michelin guidebook and period-correct maps, all served with a side of potatoes and seasonal vegetables. We begin in Weybridge, a decent-sized town that, in the days of my guidebook, had around 6,800 residents. At the time, according to my guidebook, we'd have perhaps liked to have visited Weybridge Grotto, which sounds intriguing. It was found in the grounds of Oatlands Park Hotel, or back then, Oatlands Palace, but it was demolished in 1948, so that's the end of that then. The real question, though, is there a Weybridge in Weybridge? The answer is yes, because the River Wey runs through the town, and on Bridge Road in Weybridge we find the Weybridge. There's been a bridge of sorts at this location since the year 675 AD, but the bridge we see today isn't anywhere near as old as that, having been constructed in the year 1865. It's a Victorian iron bridge, which is probably why it's still standing. Previous bridges were constructed out of wood and needed to be replaced regularly. The Weybridge remains in use today, albeit with a weight limit on traffic, but it too has been replaced by a more modern bridge in the A317. A short distance from the Weybridge in Weybridge is Brooklands, and my guidebook only says one thing: motor track and aviation ground. Excellent. Brooklands race circuit and then airfield needs little introduction. It opened in 1907, making it the first purpose-built banked racing circuit in the world. A couple of years later, an airfield was incorporated into the site, allowing for people with far too much money to fly into Brooklands, jump into a race car, enjoy a weekend of gentlemanly racing before flying off home again. Racing would come to an end in 1939, with the site being turned into a huge aircraft manufacturing works, which was essential at the time, but it also made Brooklands a bit of an easy target. Here's a major aircraft factory surrounded by a huge concrete oval, and yeah, it got bombed to buggery. Post-war, aircraft manufacturing continued at the site, and it was actually expanded or rebuilt with a large solid runway in the early 1950s, but racing never returned to Brooklands, with the track mostly being abandoned. However, some parts of the track still remain in place today, and you're able to walk on sections of the historic race circuit. You can learn all about it and more at the Brooklands Museum, which nobody has ever visited and said they'd had a crap day out. Expensive, perhaps, but well worth the trip. New shock horror, something is expensive in Surrey? No, but seriously do go, it's a fantastic place. But there's no time to visit today because we're heading off to our next destination, the town of Woking. And there's aliens in Woking, or Martians, and no, I don't mean the locals. No one would have believed that in the last few years of the 19th century, H.G. Wells would write his perhaps most well-known and famous story, The War of the Worlds. If you aren't familiar, where have you been for the last 120 years? But anyway, at the time, he lived in Woking, and the story all kicks off here at Horsell Common, a real place that served as the starting location for the alien invasion. They would then go on to destroy Woking in its entirety before moving on to other parts of the country. As for the Martian tripod in Woking, it was installed in 1998, stands at 7 metres tall, and it's made out of chrome electro-polished stainless steel. In the late 1970s, the book and story was reworked and re-released as a musical studio album by Jeff Wayne, and yeah, it's pretty good actually. I'd like to have taken a look at McLaren Automotive's Technology Centre, which is located in Woking, but unfortunately it's in a no-fly zone and it's all private land, so that's not going to happen. But don't worry, because I found something equally as exciting, and it's Guildford. Today, it's a massive town with around 125,000 residents, but in the days of my guidebook, there were only around 25,000 people living here. That said, in those days, it would still have been considered a fairly large town. But did you know that Guildford was home to the world's first purpose-built car factory? Maybe. Today, known as the Rodborough Buildings, it's a Wetherspoons, but it was originally built as a car factory in the early 1900s by a company called Dennis, which was set up by the Dennis brothers in Guildford in 1895. Dennis are perhaps more well known for their commercial vehicles, such as trucks, coaches and fire engines, and these are the sort of vehicles that were produced at the Rodborough Building. However, they quickly outgrew the factory and decided to move production to here, a business park. Oh, I see. The factory has been demolished and yeah, I'll cut to the chase. In 2007, Dennis Specialist Vehicles, as they had become known, ceased to exist. But we mustn't be sad though, because actually it's a great example of a local success story. A couple of blokes from Guildford set up a company, built the first factory of its type and provided jobs and income to pretty much everyone in Guildford. And they continue to do so in one way, shape or form for 129 years. Not a bad effort. Well done, Guildford. Not so well done though on Guildford Cathedral. What in God's name, quite literally, is this? The cathedral isn't mentioned in my guidebook, I thought because it was just too hideous, but it turns out it wasn't even built at the time of my guidebook's publication, which is interesting because it means it's a church that doesn't have hundreds of years worth of history. It was built in it was started in 1936. Construction was underway when a small disagreement would break out in 1939, meaning construction had to be halted. It wouldn't resume again until 1952, by which time everyone had run out of money, so it was a slow process with funding proving difficult. However, praise our Lord and Saviour, the church was finished, finally, by 1965. Being constructed in what we would call modern times perhaps explains its interesting design, or lack thereof. It's not quite the Gothic churches built in the 1200s that we're used to, but it's certainly a striking structure. Interestingly, because of the vast timescale in its construction, there's a colour variance in the building's brickwork. In the early days of construction, the bricks were manufactured on site here in Guildford. However, post-war they changed supplier to one based in Sussex, and as a result the building is made up of two different colours of brick. Yes, we're talking about the colour of bricks. It's not what I had in mind either, but allow me to redeem myself as we take a drive down the A281, a road that remains pretty much the same as the old days and takes us through some nice villages like Bramley and Palmer's Cross. It will also take us to a place called Dunsfold, and if you're a motoring enthusiast, you might recognise that place name. Dunsfold is home to Dunsfold Aerodrome, but it's perhaps better known as the Top Gear test track. This is the track that was used in the what you might call golden era of Top Gear when it was Clarkson, Hammond and May on the BBC. The airfield was constructed in 1942 and it was actually built by the Canadian Army, who got the whole thing done in 6 months. After the war, the airfield was taken over by Hawker, later Hawker Siddeley, and in the 1960s they tested the world's first vertical takeoff and landing jet, known as the Harrier. Dunsfold Aerodrome has a fascinating history, but we'd probably never even have heard of it if it wasn't for that pokey old motoring show known as Top Gear. They used the site as their test track between 2002 and 2020. Since 2006, attempts have been made to redevelop the site into housing, but for a while this was knocked back. However, it would seem that the developers have finally won over the officials because there are plans underway to build 1,800 houses on the site, and we can expect the Top Gear test track and the airfield to be removed, so I'm glad to have filmed it whilst I still could. It's very possible that we went out of our way a bit to see the Top Gear test track, but no bother, we're going to sort of head back on ourselves, but use the B2130, which offers a nice quiet drive to our next destination, the town of Godalming. In the days of my guidebook, Godalming was a fairly busy place with around 9,500 residents, and one of the industries keeping everyone busy was quarrying, because Godalming is a source of a rare rock known as Bargate stone. It's a type of sandstone, but it's only found in this area. Today it's rarely used because of its scarcity, but over the last few hundred years it's been used in the construction of many buildings around Surrey, including Godalming Parish Church. The church's location is on Church Street. Who'd have thought it? And it's on the same street that we find what my guidebook refers to as timbered houses. Back in the old days, they certainly would have been houses. They were built in the 17th century and they're amongst some of the oldest buildings in the town. They feature a distinct patterned timber known as the magpie pattern. This pattern had to be rediscovered because at some point in the 1800s, some idiot plastered over it, hiding it all from view. It wouldn't be until the 1900s, when cracks started to appear in the plaster, that people realised what was underneath, so the plaster was removed, exposing the original timberwork. Good timing. No, it's all right, go for it. Just finished as you came round, thank you. Exciting stuff, but it's time to move on to our final destination, and to get there we'll be wanting the B3001, which in the old days was straightforward enough, but at Milford the A3 Chonky Boy dual carriageway forces us to divert off the period correct route and rejoin it once we've crossed over the A3. These crudely drawn coloured lines show us where the old route would have gone and the route we're forced to follow. Next up, an illegal rubbish dump. This is Gostrey Meadow in Farnham, and I know what you're thinking. That's a nice little park that you've got there. What's the deal with the rubbish? Well, if we go back to the early 1900s, this area was part of an estate owned by the Bush Hotel. Interestingly, the hotel is still open today, but that's not the point. Over the years, the estate was segmented and sold off, with a lot of the land being used to construct housing, but Gostrey Meadow ended up as an illegal rubbish dump where everyone and anyone would dump their shite on the open land. This wasn't ideal, so in 1909, the local council purchased the land, cleared it and landscaped it, turning it into a public park, which is still here today. My guidebook brings us to Waverley Abbey, found a short distance from Farnham's town centre. It was an abbey, built in 1128, but today it's an impressive array of ruins, none of which are part of the original 1128 built structure, because the abbey was severely flooded in the early 1200s. Something that would become a regular thing, with the abbey being constantly repaired and eventually completely rebuilt, sadly on the exact same floodplain as before, so yeah. Most of the abbey was demolished as part of King Henry VIII's dissolution of the monasteries, but it's believed that some of the stone from the abbey made its way into the construction of Waverley Abbey House, which was built in 1725 and found to the north of the abbey site. Interestingly, if you explore the area, you might find a few leftovers from the second small disagreement, and this is because something called the GHQ line passes right through the abbey site. Essentially, this was a massive line of defence structures that spanned the country, which, if required, would fight off an invasion from enemy forces. However, most of it was never used because an invasion never came. Oh! And there we are then, guys. That's all we've got time for this week. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you liked the video. If you did, there is of course a button specifically for that, and if you haven't subscribed already, please consider doing so. That'd be wicked sweet awesome. Enjoy the rest of your week, whatever it is you get up to. My name's John, you've been watching Auto Shenanigans, and I'll see you guys next time for another exciting Great British Road Journey. Till then, take care, bye bye. Allez, hop!